And so you obviously blame a lot on Bush and these other people. The nature of terrorism is a tactic. The strategy of terrorism is to attack in a reflexive way a society, to go and take, in a sense, the silent majority and appeal to the extremes in that society and the extremes in the other society. So in a sense, the solution seems to be, how do you get that coalition of the sane, of the silent majority? But looking at the mechanisms of reflexivity in both ends, I think would strengthen your book. Can you comment on reflexivity and terrorism?
Well, terrorism is a certain manifestation that is not new. I mean, we've had cases of terrorism before. You had the anarchists in the 19th century, and you can probably write a history of terrorism. So terrorism is not a new phenomenon, and of course it's also not in any way a monolithic kind of thing. It takes very many different forms. And in my view, it's the way that we responded to terrorism that has pushed us off in some very dangerous and counterproductive direction. And so the reflexivity is in the interplay between the terrorism and the response to terrorism. So, we used to have a president who said, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself," right? We now have a president who said that, this is just the beginning, and, this is somehow a vital threat to our survival, and the next time it will come in the form of a mushroom cloud. So it wasn't even just enough to respond to the terrorism, which was terrifying enough because it was an extremely, traumatic event, and that touched us all because we saw it on television. It was not just something we heard about. So a terrific event that was further exaggerated and then exploited to pursue certain goals that were never really announced or discussed, and which one can only sort of reconstruct or try to guess. But it led us into a very dangerous direction because the war on terror is basically not the right way to fight terrorism, and it has become accepted as a metaphor. It's a metaphor that has been taken literally and accepted as such, and today dominates political life. It actually influences the way the opposition, the Democrats, are forming their policy advice practically more than it affects the Republicans. So there is reflexivity for you, where you have a distortion of reality, a misinterpretation of reality, which becomes reality. But then events don't follow the course that is expected of them. And so the war on terror led to the invasion of Iraq, and the invasion of Iraq created a quagmire from which we can't extricate ourselves. And we are now beginning to realize that something has gone wrong. And I think now the public is pretty well realizing that the invasion of Iraq was somehow wrong. But the idea that there's something wrong with the war on terror has not yet sunk in. It's still accepted as the basis on which we shape policy. And I argue in the book that until we realize that it's a metaphor which has been misinterpreted and misused, I don't think we can actually extricate ourselves and correct our course in the world. That's the connection with terrorism.
Just one follow-up is, I would look at reflexivity, but also in terms of how do you change the populace in America, because it is a citizen democratic base. If terrorism is using it, we have to also understand how the system of communication works in informing and using something besides fear. And that would be an interesting problem to work on, the concept of reflexivity in terms of a communications, interaction, thinking group.
Well, I don't know how you do it, but
Arthur?
At the risk of shifting course from the discussion of the here and now, in reading some of your work, I come away with a sense that there's a connection to the work of Professor Hayek in describing, I remember a very old article he wrote about how a central planned economy could never work because the individuals always have more specific and appropriate information and can harness that information. And it sounds very much like what I think you're saying. And perhaps you could expand on how what you're saying is similar to or different from that work. And I think that would be.
I think it's related to Hayek. I was particularly influenced by Popper. And Popper was a close friend and disputant with Hayek. They engaged in a friendly dispute in the 40s. There was a series of articles in the Economica. One was, I think, the basis of the road to serfdom, and the other one, the historicism, something. The poverty of historicism. So it was a really profound philosophical discussion where they both had the same basis on which they talked. But Hayek believed in the ability of the market to sort of produce equilibrium and achieve the optimum allocation of the resources. And I differ from him because while I accept that it would be wonderful if the market produced that result, it would be a sort of an escape from the human predicament. But it isn't. I mean, it doesn't correspond to reality because markets, and particularly financial markets, don't necessarily tend towards a theoretical equilibrium. So, because people are not basing their judgments on information. First of all, of course, information is asymmetric. I mean, you've got Joe Stiglitz and all that. But I go a little further than Joe Stiglitz because I don't think that information is enough to come to rational decisions. So, because you have to interpret the information, you have to form a judgment about what is going to happen, and what is going to happen depends on your judgment. Therefore, it's not something to be known. It's something to be decided. And so you have this built-in bias, which often manifests itself in self-reinforcing processes. So you can dig yourself into various holes. The war on terror and the invasion of Iraq is one hole, but you can become enthusiastic about internet, and you can have an internet bubble.